Hi, Fil Eisler here. I'm hanging out with Rob on Front Row Live.
What's up, man? Congratulations with the success of this soundtrack for this new film on Netflix, Thunder Force. And not only is it, you're on a big avenue as Netflix with a great cast, but you're representing the metal world in such a bigger platform. And that is incredible because not a lot of composers have been able to do that. And if they have, they haven't nailed it like you did. So talk to me a little bit about why metal was the perfect fit for this particular soundtrack. And I'm curious what that whole challenge was like for you.
Well, thank you, first of all. And first of all, it's because metal is very real to me. I was a huge metalhead growing up as a teenager. And although I've sort of gotten into a lot of other things since, I'd always sort of thought, God, wouldn't it be great to do something like that? It's funny because I remember being on holiday maybe like 10 years ago. I think it was around, for some reason, it's when Death Magnetic came out, because I remember listening to that by the pool in Bali and like scribbling in the back of the book I was reading. And going, wouldn't it be great if we just got like a band together with like this guy and that guy and this guy? And then I kind of forgot about it. And, scoring movies is about whatever opportunities get put in front of you. You got to score the film. You can't just go romantic comedy. That needs a death metal band. But then when this came out and when this came up and I saw the first cut of it, there was a scene where Melissa's character Lydia is wearing a Slayer shirt, right? And there's literally a scene in which they're trying to take it off her and she's like, "Over my dead body, will you get this? I bought this on the Rain in Blood tour or something," and I was like, ooh, okay. So that's kind of how it came about. I mean, the whole, I have a mutual friend with Dave Lombardo, and I called him up and just went, "Do you reckon Dave might be into doing a movie?" And he was like, "I don't know, I can ask him." And next thing I knew, we were on the phone, and then, I knew that they'd just done Mr. Bungle together, he and Scott. And I kind of said, "Do you reckon Scott might be into doing something?" And you got to remember as well, like Slayer and Anthrax, after Iron Maiden, were maybe the second and third shows I ever saw as a kid. Like, and I mean way back. I mean, like, I'm gonna date myself here, but like Rain and Blood and Among the Living. So I was like, there wasn't a small part of me that wasn't going, could get to work with like heroes, you know what I mean? And then of course, like, I met them both and they're both awesome, and we just down for whatever. So it was an amazing experience. It's definitely the most fun I've ever had on a movie.
And I love the way that you were able to balance like the comedy of Melissa McCarthy with the sonics and the sounds and of the soundtrack. How did you go about as far as scoring this film with these artists? And you also added a couple others that I was like super excited about. Lizzie Hale being one of them,
right,
and Corey Taylor being another. And just recently, Tina Guo, who is like an amazing like cellist, but like she's also working now with Serge from System of a Down. So it's like you really like got some of the best people, if not the best people in the metal world to kind of take part in this film. So being able to score this film, like, what was that process like? And what was it like in your experience, like working with them?
It was great, man. I mean, so first of all, you wouldn't necessarily think metal, comedy, but it's first and foremost a superhero movie. It might be completely silly and fun and all the rest of it, which it is. But that was kind of why I thought it lent itself to the whole genre, because it's funny, I've ended up scoring all these comedies, but I've never been sort of like that crazy about scoring comedy. Like, I want to make plinky plonk funny music, you know what I mean? But whenever you've seen metal crop up in a film, it's usually like super dark and super serious and all that, and that's all great and it's fun. But this movie kind of needed like a bit of a kick-ass soundtrack. It's like the fight crime, they're having fun doing it kind of thing. You know what I mean? I remember playing Scott some of the orchestral stuff, and he was just like, oh, amazing. And same, you know, when the orchestra was being recorded in London, they would hear Scott and Dave's parts and just be like, oh man, we never get to do this. It's a bunch of classical music hearing like, you know, and they're like, oh yeah, we can do that too. You know, there's 100 of us. Check this out. So it was great fun, and actually doing it, man, it was just a dream, you know. It was so much fun. Also, you got to remember this was in the middle of, you know, the and so you know we couldn't gather for a little while, and Scott and I kind of, you know, finally got to meet up. We got to we quarantined for a little while, and you know, I had to test every morning, and then finally we could actually get together. And when we recorded the bits with Scott and Dave, it was just kind of us in a bubble at the back of the studio, just us and the crew, and it was kind of like it wasn't happening. It was like, you know, we could go in there without masks and hug each other and make music, and almost as though everything was normal, you know. And it was just so much fun. It was incredible. It's like I thought my demos were pretty good, but then you put the demos up to the real thing that I did with Scott and Dave, and it's like, oh, okay, Phil, you can. It's like, you know, they're demos, and this is why you hire guys like that. It's like why I could have gotten session players in to come in and kind of sound like that. My demos actually sounded pretty close. I could have probably made it sound pretty close, but why do that when you could, you know, when I could work with the guys who invented this shit in the first place?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Nobody sounds like them. I mean, they're genuinely nobody. You know, there's a million guitarists out there that can go chug chug chug, but it doesn't sound like Scott Ian. There's a million drummers that can play a blast beat, but it's not. But it's not Dave Lombardo. They're the guys that came up with this stuff. You know.
Right. I mean, you can't half-ass metal. It's either all or nothing.
It's real or it isn't, and I think that's one of my problems with when I've heard kind of someone sneak heavy guitars in the movies before and stuff. Is very often it's kind of not real. It's someone's like, oh, wouldn't this be cool? Or a director goes, I like metal, and the composers, you know, maybe had nothing to do with it before and left scrambling as to like, well, what would that sound like? It's like, well, I lived it, and you know, I was in metal bands, and you know, it just felt right.
What would you say were some of the challenges that you faced in order to have this metal music with, you know, blended in with the orchestra as well?
I mean, from that perspective, there kind of weren't that many, to be honest, man. It just, in my head, it made sense. It was actually the biggest challenge was explaining it to the guys at Netflix, because eventually they really got behind it. But I think when I first floated the idea, it's like, this, imagine the pitch, right? Now I'm going, so look, I kind of need like $1 million, a massive orchestra, and there's these two guys who are huge, like, you know, thrash metal stars in the 80s, and I could see like the eyebrows going up. And you know, they're like, what's a thrash what? Yeah, you know, he played on like Angel of Death, all these big, I'm sorry, Angel of what? And you know, they're just a bit afraid. But then when they started hearing the demos, and then definitely when they started hearing the recordings, everyone was like, all right, we see what you mean now. It made sense. So I mean, musically, it made perfect sense to me. You know, you can get orchestras to play riffs. You can, you know, if you think about the whole genre of superhero movies, everything that goes with that, the sort of the pomp and the circumstance, and the sort of, you know, the posturing and everything that goes with it, it's like that music lends itself perfectly to that. And I don't see why they have to live exclusive of each other. It doesn't have to be like metal or orchestral music. It just works together great. Anyway, it all made sense to me. I just had to sort of explain the blueprint a few times before people start freaking out.
I feel like now you just created a new relationship between orchestra and metal, and on top of that, Netflix and metal music. I feel like now they're going to be more open to new ideas with music instead of the same old kind of material.
I hope so, man. I'm certainly not the first person to do it. There's definitely been people who've, you know, dabbled with those ideas, but there was a very specific way I wanted to do it in my head, which was, you know, not like I was trying to make a throwback score to the kind of 70s Superman or anything, but I wanted it to have themes like that, and you want to hear those superhero fanfares and everything. Like, I wanted it to feel like a real superhero movie, like the ones I grew up with, but a sort of modern version of it. And the metal stuff was just, you know, it fits, man. It makes sense. It makes total sense. It makes sense to me, anyway.
So when you were working with Ben Falcone during this process, like, what was that chemistry like between the two of you? And was he also involved in the soundtrack, the recording process of the soundtrack?
Yeah, he's always very involved and very hands-on with everything. So the way I usually do it, you know, it varies from director to director, right? But what I tend to do when I first see a movie, or when I first have a conversation with a director about what this movie's going to be, what they want it to be, what they want it to feel like, is to kind of take whatever I have at that point, if it's the script or just the conversation, or I've actually got some kind of a cut of a film to look at. There's a point where I'm going to turn that off and stop looking at it and just go write music. And then I'll come back and see where I can fit it into what there is of the film, if there's a film at that point, which with Thunder Force there was. You know, the temp music, which is what editors and music editors put in, it's a sort of temporary soundtrack while they're building the cut and while they're screening it, you know, which is usually made up of old movie soundtracks and stuff, had literally nothing to do with what I actually ended up writing. So what I did was I went away and I wrote probably, I want to say about 15 minutes, 20 minutes of music, a sort of a suite of ideas and themes. And, you know, at that point, everything was being done remotely. So I kind of sat here, we figured out a way I could play it to Ben remotely at the same time as I was listening. And it was fun, man. It was just fun to sort of sit there and watch. You know, you'd expect the superhero fanfare, you'd expect the big orchestral flourish. And then when the metal band kicks in, it was great just watching his face kind of light up. And like, oh, I wasn't expecting that, you know. And that gave me enough confidence to just kind of keep going with it. You know what I mean? Like, he didn't hate the idea. He was like, oh, that's fun. This works, you know.
That must be like a cool feeling, being able to pitch something that to other people is so left field, and being able to, like, one, make them fall in love with it, and two, just nailing it with like such a mega, like, cast of artists. So with that being said, the fact that you were able to make this, I guess you would say, like a dream, be somewhat of or become a reality, what did you learn about yourself during this process?
Whew, that's a good question. What I learned about myself, well, it was a very, very stark reminder to make sure that you always have fun doing this stuff. Otherwise, what is the point? You know what I mean? It's very easy, especially with film, for it to become kind of a grind, because there is a lot of work involved. It's lots of 18-hour days and lots of no sleep and lots of, you know, it's like most musicians, being away from your family, and you know, it's hard work, but you have to remember why you got into it. And if you don't, it kind of shows up in the music, I think. So, you know, I was just having a blast with Scott and Dave in the studio, and then having Corey and Lizzie and Tina, and it was, you know, it was just fun. So it kind of reminded me, it was funny, actually. I had this conversation with someone else recently, and they said, what could you, if you could go back and change anything, you know, about the early part of your career, what would you change? And I'm certainly not one for regrets or trying to be revisionist about things, but this did make me think I'd listen to people a little bit less. You know what I mean? It's like, I knew this.
Gotta trust your gut.
Yeah, you have to. It's like, I knew this was going to work, and if I'd have stopped at, you know, the raised eyebrows when I went, thrash metal, guys, what do you reckon? And everyone went, ooh, yeah, sounds great. And I go, no, that's not going to fucking fly, is it? It would have never happened. I just have to go, it's going to be fine. Let me get on with it. And then kind of, you know, crash and burn if you need to, but it's you just have to trust that it's going to work. Yeah, so I guess there was a bit of that, but mostly just, man, it was just so much fun. I've rarely had this much fun on a film, you know. It was kind of actually more like making a record than making a movie, to be honest.
Well, I mean, this could open that door for you. I'm sure Scott and Dave were just like, you know what, I want to work with that guy again.
You know what? Funnily enough, we've talked about it a bunch of times actually. Like, all right, well, what next? It was, you know, it's kind of hard to go. Well, we did this movie. Bye. You know, we've already talked about like what other kinds of films could we do? You know, I mean, the possibilities are endless. Like now, it would actually be really fun to go do something super dark, and you know, especially with those guys, like so much possibility there, and then yeah, it doesn't have to be a movie. The other thing I discovered was that I really, you know, surprise surprise, loved writing with Scott, and it was one of those situations where when things come together that easily, you know there's something there. You know what I mean? Like there was no obstacle in the way of any of it. It was just, you know, I came up with a riff, I sent it to him. I'm like, next morning I'm jogging and my phone goes off and it's like Scott on a QuickTime video going, how about this for the verse? And then I mean, it came together super, super fast. And then with getting, you know, Lizzie and Corey involved too, it was like, well, we've got a song here. Who's going to sing on it? And of course, Scott's phone book is like a who's who of metal, right? So he's like, well, what do you think? Ozzy, Rob Halford? I'm like, are you kidding me? And so, you know, we went through these names and then he went Corey Taylor and we were like,
done.
That's it. Because Corey's got so much, he's got so much range. I don't mean just vocally, but stylistically, like in terms of what he can do from Slipknot to Stone Sour to this. It was like, he's the perfect candidate. And I think we literally did the whole thing over text. And to this day, I haven't met him or Lizzie. Like, I know Tina, but I've not met either of them because literally it was like, Scott Ian's texting me, do you want to be involved in a song? Yeah, man, of course I do. It's for a Melissa McCarthy movie. Yeah, great, send it over. Next afternoon, he starts sending us ideas. The next day, we had a finished song.
Wow.
You know, so yeah, it was pretty wild.
Gotta create this band and make it happen because now I want to hear more music from all of you.
I know. It was funny because, you know, when it came out, I was like, what do we even call this? You know, it's either the longest band name on earth or we're going to come up with some terrible band name for it or whatever. So we just kind of put it out there. But yeah, I mean, it sounds good, doesn't it? We want to do more.
Well, definitely looking forward to more. You know, now that you know this is an option, you know that you got to follow your gut. So, Phil, I'm excited for the soundtrack. I watched the film a couple weeks ago when it dropped, and I was telling Charlie, I was like, these voices, this sound sounds so real, so familiar. So, I mean, now I know why. so congratulations with the success of this soundtrack, and I'm definitely looking forward to more scorings from you and possibly a band.
You never know. You never know, man. Now that we can go tour again and do all kinds of stuff, you know, like who knows what's next? And that's what I love about this shit. It's you know, the possibilities really are endless.